Hey there, kaiju lovers! As promised, well, I said this to the patrons, not necessarily to all of you. I should introduce myself. I'm Nathan Marchand, and I'm actually coming to you OOC, as I like to say, out of character, or the first of what I'm calling special reports. These are going to be really off the cuff, and I'm not going to have any notes. These won't be scripted, and going to be done in such a way that I can crank these out as quickly as I can. And this all actually came about because I was originally supposed to cover a couple of things, most notably Pacific Rim the Black, which is what this special report is all about, and also Godzilla Singular Point next month on Redeemed Otaku with Bex. You might remember her from the Rebirth of Mothra trilogy episodes that I did over the summer last year. And her being a huge anime fan, and these are kaiju themed animes essentially. So it seemed like the perfect time and the perfect things to do basically crossover episodes on, and that was going to make them simultaneous releases and put them out on both feeds so that both of our audiences could hear the episodes more easily. But without getting into it, that ended up not working out. But I wanted to make sure that I put something out, and it's a little bit frustrating because I put my schedule for 2021 together before I knew that either Pacific Rim the Black or Godzilla Singular Point were going to be things, and there just really wasn't any room to change it up. So that's why I am putting these out, to let you guys know as quickly as I can of what I think of this. And I will also admit it's a little bit of an experiment. I use Zencastr to record now, and they recently added a video recording feature, and I'm giving it a try to hopefully put this out as a video on the YouTube channel as well. If I don't, well, at least I got some audio out to all of you. So, Pacific Rim the Black. First, I will give you my general thoughts, and then I'm going to dive into some spoilers, because, yes, there are some major spoilers in this, and I don't want to ruin this for any of you who have not have not seen the show yet. See, editing does wonders, so I can get rid of all these starts and stops like this. So, general thoughts. I like this. I liked it a lot. This is coming from somebody who absolutely adores that first Pacific Rim movie. It's one of my favorite genre films of the last really 10 years. One of the best soundtracks of any blockbuster in the last 10 years. I can't say that enough. And I remember that not being all that great of a summer for blockbusters, and because of that, the original Pacific Rim was the most fun I had had at a theater. Not only that whole summer, maybe even that whole year. I'm not sure. I'd have to look back on what other movies came out in 2013. But I ended up seeing it twice, and like I said, I absolutely adore the thing. And I was even a little bit of an apologist for it for a while, because it was difficult for me to get my friends as excited about it, some of them anyway, as excited about it as I was. All that being said, fast forward, and we get Pacific Rim Uprising, and I really wanted to like it. I really did, but I was unsure about it going in, and I'm going to be honest with you, and you can hate me all you want, G-Man, because I know you listen to this. I hate that movie. I hate that movie quite a bit. I won't go into why, but basically I feel like Uprising retroactively makes the original movie incredibly stupid, along with its own set of sins that I won't get into. All of that to say, because of that, I can't accept it, and I absolutely despise that movie. It's one of the rare times I have walked out of the theater angry. I couldn't even, enjoy how bad it was or anything. It's a whole to-do. It's a whole to-do that I could get into, and I'm not going to do that right now. I'm going to save that for a potential future episode of the show. So, now that you understand that, I actually really liked The Black. It's a little bit surprising at points. The trailers do a really good job of giving you just enough to get you excited without really giving a whole lot away, which is funny because right before I recorded this, because I just binged the entire show today over in 3 different sittings. Basically, while I was having breakfast, lunch, and dinner, I would watch episodes. So I got through all of it, and yes, I really do mean in 3 meals I got through all of it, because one of the first things that surprised me is this thing was only 7 episodes long. I was expecting it to be more like a 12 or a 13 episode series, and instead it was 7. So I did something that I don't normally do, or something that I haven't done all that much in a while, which is I binged it. So I got through it all. So it was a couple hours ago when I finished it. I just now decided to sit down and record because I've been a little bit busy with some other things. And I rewatched the trailers actually before I recorded to kind of remind myself going into this what happened. And I'm happy to say that with really, I notice more things now having watched the show, but the trailers, like I said, don't really tell you everything. The story is actually really good. The characters are fantastic in this. I would think it would be a little bit difficult to do do a different kind of story than what we got in the 2 films with this universe, but they find a way to do that, where it's this brother and sister who are trying to find their parents, who were Jaeger pilots. It takes place in Australia. Which is the interesting thing. There's very much a Mad Max vibe in this show, which I actually kind of really like with some of the aesthetics and the setting. The big difference is there are giant monsters. But the villain's a little bit like Shane is his name. He's a little bit like a Mad Max villain, and you got all these abandoned, rundown cities that are a lot like a Mad Max movie. It takes place a lot in the Australian outback. So again, parallels to Mad Max. It's just in this case, instead of a crazy car, you have a Jaeger, which giant robots make everything better, just like giant monsters make everything better. So they're trying to find their parents after they've been gone for 5 years, and they're not sure if they're alive anymore, but then a kaiju attacks the settlement where they've been living and leaving them with basically nothing. So they decide, well, we may as well go out there. And it's interesting because the sister, who's the younger of the 2 of them, is really impulsive. And there's this hilarious scene in the first episode where she finds where this Jaeger Atlas destroyer, again, Pacific Rim, continues to rocket with the coolest names you will ever hear for giant robots. And she just keeps skipping over all of the training lessons to learn how to pilot a Jaeger, whereas her brother actually had some training to use a Jaeger. So they have really interesting personalities that clash with each other and create some character conflict throughout all of this. And then I'm trying to remember, I can't remember if it's the end of the first, I think it's the end of the second episode. By the end of the second, yes, it was the second episode. By the end of the second episode, we're introduced to another character you see in the trailers. They just call him Boy. He's this little kid that they find, that they rescue from a lab, I should say. And they don't quite know what the heck is going on with him. He's a very strange kid, and he doesn't talk. And there's all these weird things about him, and they don't know what to make of him. But they take pity on him, and they bring him along. And then as they're going off into the Australian outback, trying to get to Sydney, they run in with this guy named Shane, who is basically running a settlement of his own out in the middle of nowhere. And he knows that if he can get control of this Jaeger, he's going to be the big dog, big man in the outback there. So there's all these very interesting clashing goals, and it's there we also meet another character who's more or less another main cast member. Her name is May. Looks a lot like Zerum. not Zerum. Looks a lot like Iria, I should say, from Zerum. I have zero doubt in my mind that movie and that anime miniseries, which I just watched a few weeks ago, was definitely an influence on her design at the very least. So basically, what I'm going to tell you right now is that if you liked Pacific Rim, heck, even if you like Pacific Rim Uprising, you'll enjoy this. Anime was a huge influence on Pacific Rim. Guillermo del Toro made no secret of that. And so the idea that Pacific Rim would be made into an anime just makes sense, or have some sort of anime tie-in. It just makes sense. And as someone who loves kaiju and loves anime, this was perfect. I mean, the first movie was perfect in that regard, and seeing this actual anime based on that was perfect as well. So now that I've gotten that out of the way, if you haven't seen the show, I'm warning you right now, shut this off and then come back later. Otherwise, I warned you. All right. Everything's fair game. One of the things that I was trying to figure out while watching this was where exactly it took place in the Pacific Rim timeline. I originally thought that perhaps it took place during the Kaiju War, which we see the end of in the first movie. Or maybe potentially it took place between the movies. That wouldn't quite make sense, but that's what I thought. Near as I can tell, this actually takes place after both movies. In fact, it might take place years, maybe even decades after both movies. I'm not entirely sure. Which, first off, I am going to say I am mildly disappointed, but I understand why they did this. I'm a little bit disappointed that technically Uprising is canon in this, because they make reference to things from Uprising. They make reference to things in Uprising, because that's one of my beefs. I feel like I have to reject Uprising as canon, but now I'm in this weird position because Pacific Rim: The Black is really good, and it uses things from Uprising. And without Uprising, The Black wouldn't be as good as it is. So that's frustrating. Now, admittedly, they don't make reference to the parts of Uprising that I think make it incredibly stupid. They use actually some of the good ideas that were in Uprising. The biggest one being, and you'll see this thing in the trailer, is they use one of the Kaiju Jaeger hybrids from Uprising. It's supposed to be a special one that during the Uprising Wars, clever, basically evolved into something greater than the other ones that were being used by the precursors. And when we see it in this show, it's basically just marauding around and eating other kaiju. Literally eating other kaiju. And it has a connection with Boy, which even by the end of the show, it gives you enough to kind of figure out why it has a connection with Boy, but there's a lot of mysteries, a lot of questions left unanswered. Not only that, I mean, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but then they drop this bomb in literally at the last second of the last episode, and I'm just like, which I'll get to in a second, because holy crap, it opened up Pandora's box, to say the least, which is funny because I wrote a novel called Pandora's Box. Anyway, so we have that thing there. They call the thing Apex, I think is what they call it, which is interesting because there's an organization called Apex in GVK coming up pretty soon. And I think they call the thing Apex because he's supposed to be the apex predator, I suppose. And So that's one of the first things that, is big surprises, I should say, that come out of this. The other one, since I've already mentioned him, talk a little bit about Boy. I still don't quite know what exactly is going on with Boy. I definitely got the impression once Haley and Taylor, that's right, Haley and Taylor, when they found him in a lab and he's in this big tube, I knew right then, okay, he's probably some sort of genetic experiment that was done as part of the war effort, because they found him in a Pan-Pacific Defense Corps facility. So I figured that was what was going on with him. He behaved a little bit strangely. There's a point where he gets shot in the head and there's nothing. He takes the bullet as if it was nothing. He gets bit by a snake and he doesn't get poisoned. All of these weird things. He'll randomly run around and try to stab a scorpion with a screwdriver and stuff like that. He won't hurt people, but he'll do weird little things like that. Then you get to the final episode. Well, then you get to the penultimate episode, and he manages to get Apex not to destroy the what's the name of it? Atlas Destroyer. It doesn't destroy Atlas Destroyer, and saves Haley and Taylor. Well, by that I mean, like, he actually is able to communicate with Apex in some form or another. Apex even drifts with him a little bit, and then scans Haley's mind to understand them a little bit. It's a really weird scene, and I'm not exactly sure how he's able to do that. I'm just glad that drift compatibility means something again in this series, because that was one of my biggest problems with Uprising, was just how stupid it was about how to handle drift compatibility. It really didn't seem to matter anymore. In this, it matters a lot again, thankfully. But then you had this, I will admit, it's kind of this absurd scene, even for an anime, where the kid is standing on the visor, windshield, or whatever you want to call it, for the cockpit in the head of the Jaeger, and the Apex is bringing his big old fist down to smash it, and he just stands there and blocks it with his hands. I'm like, really? You want me to believe he's so strong that he could stop that thing and absorb all the impact? It was just like, okay, it was just a little preposterous. And then I thought, well, maybe he communicated with it and it stopped its fist right when it got there or something. Like, I mean, you could write it off as something else, but all that to say, clear that he had some sort of a connection. He was special. And then you get to the final episode, and they go full tilt Attack on Titan with this crap. It turns out he's actually a kaiju disguised as a human. You know how Eren Yeager can turn into a Titan? This kid can turn into a kaiju, because he does exactly that. And I'm trying to remember the design for his transformed kaiju, his kaiju mode. I'm trying to remember. It reminded me of something, but I can't remember. It's eluding me what I thought he turned into. I should have kept some notes, but I was just trying to enjoy the show, honestly, and not necessarily trying to treat it like I was doing an episode. Which, another one of the reasons I'm doing this instead of doing it as an episode is because this is honestly a bit longer than what I would normally covering for an episode. And like I said, I didn't have a spot to fill this in the schedule to put it in. Well, at least to not be able to give it the full MIFV treatment. But yes, and then he tries to help them fight the kaiju, because this is the kaiju that attacked their settlement at the beginning, that they managed to defeat by, it was kind of hilarious, because Atlas Destroyer is a training Jaeger, doesn't have any weapons, so all they can do is punch it. And so there's an AI, which is another thing that's different. There's some expansions on the Pacific Rim universe that I'll get into in this. And so they crouch down and let it fall down a cliff. Well, it's been following them, I guess, for the duration of the series. The thing's name is Copperhead, and then they get into a big fight with it at the end. That's the big final showdown, and it basically takes that Jaeger plus a nuke and a little bit of help from Boy in kaiju mode to defeat this thing. And then I'll talk about this because this was the big, ridiculous cliffhanger thing. There are these weird beings that we see. They're like the size of Ewoks. They're really short, maybe 3 feet tall. They're walking around on rooftops with these basically like giant Doberman. When I say giant, I mean like the size of a bear. That sort of that big. The like Doberman kaiju you see in this, because there's different kinds of kaiju in this in Australia in this universe, which is yet another sign that this is definitely years after the Uprising. It has to be, because we didn't see kaiju like this before, and the way the Jaegers work now is a little bit different. But anyway, so they're standing around on the rooftop, and one of them whispers to all the rest of them, "The Kaiju Messiah is here." I'm like, what are you talking about? Kaiju Messiah? What? What? The episode hasn't come out yet, but I did do an episode. I did record an episode on Godzilla King of the Monsters where, spoiler warning on what we discussed in that episode with Brandon from Up From the Depths and the OmniViewer. I called Godzilla Messiah of the Monsters and but apparently somebody working on this show decided they needed to have a literal Kaiju Messiah, because that's what this kid is called. It's weird, and I don't know what that means. Like I said, it's a Pandora's box that just blew this stuff up, because the kids don't find their parents in this, so their plot line is technically not finished. So I don't know what's going on with that. We don't know if their parents are alive or dead yet. They find their parents Jaeger, but we don't know what happened to them. So that is still ongoing, and from what I read online, we're supposed to get at least 2 seasons of this show. So we'll see what happens. I hope they don't drag it out longer than they need it to. If it's meant to be 2 seasons, make it 2 seasons, get it over with. So those are some of the, I guess, the big spoilery things. And then, like I said, there are things here that are definitely different. That are definitely expansions on the universe. In this, Jaegers now have AIs, because we have kind of another character in this. Her name is Loa. She's an AI that helps to operate the Jaegers. Now, they can't drift with pilots in order to operate them, but they can assist with things and do things like let them recommend strategies and things like that. Let them know what's going on, which I guess we hadn't really seen before. They do find another Jaeger doesn't have an AI, so it's meant to be. It's definitely something that's different. And there's also breaches. Now, originally in Pacific Rim, there was one breach. This is where the title of the movie comes from, Pacific Rim, because it was in the bottom of a trench underwater, and kaiju were swimming up out of there. In this universe now, at this point, breaches can open just about anywhere, and they're opening up in a lot of different places in Australia. In fact, there's even a point where one opens directly under Atlas Destroyer, and it nearly falls into the precursor dimension. So they're opening up all over the place, and now we have different kinds of kaiju. I mentioned the ones that were basically like giant Doberman dogs, and they were running around, and they come after the characters. They're closer to human size, and one of them gets grabbed. You see this in the trailer. One of them gets grabbed by Apex, and he eats it. So you have that, and then there are these ones that almost look like skull crawlers. It's kind of weird that you see fighting at the beginning there. So there are all these interesting little expansions. And then, I mentioned that they talk about the Uprising Wars, and then they have these the Jaeger kaiju hybrids. Another reference that they make that delighted me is there's a point where, in desperation, Taylor says, "I need to pilot this Jaeger solo," and he attempts something that's called was it ghost piloting or something like that, where instead of using an actual person, he uses the archived memories of a Jaeger pilot in order to kind of fake out, to trick the system into letting him operate it with just one person. It's supposed to be dangerous, and not a whole lot of people have done it and survived. Well, they bring up the names of the people in the computer who did this and survived, and guess who they were? Very familiar faces. Stacker Pentecost, Raleigh Beckett, and Herc Hansen. And Taylor chooses the memories of Herc Hansen. I'm guessing probably because he was Australian, so, little solidarity there. And we get this little flashback, which he had seen at the beginning, but I didn't realize this was supposed to be Herc Hansen, where we have Herc Hansen fighting in another Jaeger to save Australia. And so it's a character. We actually see an anime version of one of the movie characters, which was really exciting. So there is stuff like that in this. So basically, all that being said, this is actually a very excellent show. I'm looking forward to season 2. I hope it comes out soon. There's a lot that I probably could go into, but like I said, all of this stuff is still relatively fresh, and I was just watching it, not to analyze it, but just to take it in and enjoy it, have a good time. And there's some wonderful things going on here with themes I love, and particularly when it comes to things like family and that's really the big thing, making connections. It's going back to that sort of stuff that we saw in the first movie, because drift compatibility is a very important thing, and sharing each other's memories in this is a big deal. There's actually a few points where we got some exposition from the characters because they use the drift like that. So it's very much in the Del Toro spirit, even though I don't think Del Toro was involved in this, because Del Toro is doing 10 million things. I know how that feels. So, but I have to say, whoever's running this, I do think some of the people who worked on the movies are working on this, and they did such a better job than basically everything that was in Uprising. They took the things from Uprising, the handful of things that were there that were actually good, and they built off of them, and they just kind of spat out the bones of the stuff that doesn't work. We aren't hearing anything about how explosively flammable kaiju blood is and all of that sort of stuff, and the kaiju aren't trying to get to a volcano and all of that nonsense that we had in the first one. It's not a perfect show. I could probably bring up some of the things that I didn't necessarily like, but I kind of have already. But honestly, at this point, I've said everything that I'm going to say right now. Like I said, just wanted to make sure I cranked this out for any of you who were curious what I thought of this and didn't think that reading a blog or something like that would be all that interesting or fun, because I honestly, as much as I like as much as I like writing things, as I am a writer by trade, and putting it up on the website, I know that the video and the audio is more likely to get traction with my audience. So that's why I decided, you know what, I'll give this a try. We'll see how it goes. All right. Thank you very much. And we are canceling the apocalypse. Thank you for listening to the Monster Island Film Vault, a podcast produced and hosted by Nate Marchand. If you enjoy the show and want to join the discussion, we'd love to hear from you. So email us at feedback@monsterislandfilmvault.com. Your message could be read on a future episode of the show. Our website is monsterislandfilmvault.com. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Monster Island Film Vault, and on Twitter, where our handle is at The Monster Isla 1. You can also follow Jimmy from NASA on Twitter at NASA Jimmy, and the Monster Island Board of Directors at Monster Isla BOD. I have fulfilled my contractual obligations! And be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube, Spotify, and Twitch. The podcast logo was created by Tyler Souls from TylerDrawsComics.com. Our theme song is Wanderer on the Offensive live edit by B33J, Sarax, Juan Madrano, and Nonsensical Lexus, which is a remix of Counterattack, Battle with the Colossus, and The Open Way, Battle with the Colossus by Kowatani from the video game Shadow of the Colossus. All film and audio clips belong to their respective copyright holders, and no infringement is intended or implied. Please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and or Podchaser to spread the word about the show. You can also support us by joining MIFV Max on Patreon. The Monster Island Film Vault is a Moonlighting Ninjas Media production. Sayonara!